All right, second part, going to be fun. So we've got a mathy looking function that we're going to graph and find the maximum value and the roots. The roots is the same thing as we were talking about before, zeros, that's what the graphing calculator calls them, or x-intercepts. Kind of makes more sense to us visually, but they're all saying the same thing. So let's type it into the graphing calculator. So we're going back to y equals. We're going to type our new equation in, negative 2x squared. Remember, your negative's at the very bottom of the calculator. Negative 2x squared plus 4x plus 30. I'm going to adjust my domain and range so I'll be able to see it. So I'm going to hit the Windows button. And my domain and range are more mathy now. I've not got the real life constraints, so minus 10 to 10 might be just fine for my domain. But I'm seeing the number 30 for the value of the function at the very end of the equation there, so I think my y max had better be bigger than 30. So I'm going to put 50. And we're going to just see if we can see it. We've made reasonable estimates. Oh, it's perfect. It's lovely. So we have been asked to find the maximum and the zeros. So the maximum I can see right there, and I'm going to use my graphing calculator. So second function, trace, gets me to that calc that gives me everything on a graph I'd ever want. And I'm going to use number 4, the maximum, and I want to be to the left of it, which I am right now. Scroll on over to the right of it. I am. There we go. You can see the little arrows at the top indicating where I'm looking, and hit enter. So the maximum is at 1, 32. So it has a maximum height at 32 units when x equals 1. It also asks us for the zeros or roots or x-intercepts. I can see 2 of them. I'm going to do the left one first. So second function trace again gives me all the options, and I want the 0, number 2. I'm going to find the left one first, so I've got to scroll to the left of that x-intercept. There, I'm well past it now. Enter. Then I want to be to the right of that, which is also above in this case. Hit enter, and you can see the arrows have got that space showing which x-intercept I want. So I can hit enter, and that one is negative 3, 0. I'm going to find the other one in the same way. And I want a 0. I want to go to the other one. These are a little slow. If you have Desmos or something like that on your iPad or whatever, you can use whatever you like. I just know these. Well, sort of know them, I guess. There we go. I'm looking to the left and to the right of that intercept. Hit enter, and it gives me a 0 of 5. There we are. There's the 2 x-intercepts. So I can do a rough sketch of my own here. I have one x-intercept of negative 3. I have an x-intercept of 5. And I have a maximum value when x equals 1. Notice that that maximum value, which is way up here, so this is not to scale. 32, we'll pretend. Okay, that 1 is right in between the 3 and the 5, right in the middle. So here's my vertex, and I'm going to swoop down to this x-intercept, pretending that it's straight. There we go. There is my parabola with the things marked. Maximum value at 132. I'd like us to just take a second and look at this equation and use our skills of factoring to see if anything interesting comes out. When I look at the 3 terms, negative 2x squared plus 4x plus 30, I see that there is a greatest common factor of 2. And since I know I don't want a negative in the first term, I'm going to make my greatest common factor negative 2. So it's going to be a little strange, but negative 2 times what gives me my first term, my second term, and my third term. For the first term, I need the x squared. For the second term, I need 2x. And because my greatest common factor is negative, this will have to be negative, so that negative times negative is positive. My last term, I need 2 times 15, and it will also have to be negative, so that negative 2 times negative 15 is 30. So I've greatest common factored it. And now I want to see if I can factor what's in the brackets. Well, it is a simple trinomial, so I can factor it with 2 sets of brackets and an x at the front of both brackets. The numbers inside the brackets are going to multiply to negative 15 and add to negative 2. Well, the easiest thing to multiply to 15 is 5 and 3. And if the 5 were negative, they would add to negative 2. So in my brackets, I want a negative 5 and 3. I wonder if you noticed anything interesting with those two brackets and these two x-intercepts. The sign is a bit troubling, but you can see where those numbers come from. The last few questions here we're going to do without the aid of a graph, and it says solve the following equations. So when you're solving something, you want x equals. That's what we mean by solve, but we know in the context of these questions that we could also be saying to you, you know what, find the x-intercept. That's x equals, or find the 0, or find the root. All of those things mean the same thing. So for the first one, I'm going to factor it. X squared, subtract x, subtract 12. My thought process is there a greatest common factor? Nope, nothing more interesting than 1. My second question is it a simple trinomial? Yes, it is. So I can factor it with 2 sets of brackets. I'm going to need an x at the front of both brackets. I need a number, 2 numbers, that multiply to negative 12 and add to negative 1. My 2 numbers are going to have to be close together, so 4 and 3 it is. And if the 4 is negative, they will add to negative 1. X subtract 4x plus 3. My answers are hidden in those 2 brackets. My 2 x-intercepts are x equals 4 or x equals negative 3. Those are my 2 x-intercepts, and I'm going to show you why. If x subtract 4 times x plus 3 equals 0, that means that either the first bracket would have to equal 0, or the second bracket would have to equal 0, because 0 times anything is 0. So if I want this thing to work up here, then one of those 2 brackets would have to be 0. For the first one, x subtract 4 equals 0. If I add 4 to both sides, there is my answer. X equals 4. If I subtract 3 from both sides for the second one, there is my second x-intercept. Let's try the second one at the top here. I'm going to factor this thing. The first thing I look for is whether there's a greatest common factor, and there is. For this one, the greatest common factor is negative 5. If I factor out negative 5, in my brackets I'll have x squared, subtract 6x, subtract 7. Remember, negative times negative is positive, so I'd get what I started with. My third line would be, can I do anything more with what's in the brackets? Yes, I can. It's a simple trinomial, which means I can factor it with 2 sets of brackets, x at the front of both, and then I need 2 numbers that multiply to negative 7 and add to negative 6. The only way to multiply to 7 is 7 and 1. So if I have the 7 negative, then they will add to negative 6. There, I have fully factored it, and that will help me find my x-intercepts. Negative 5 times x minus 7 times x plus 1 equals 0. So that means x minus 7 equals 0. Negative 5 never equals 0. Or x plus 1 equals 0. Either one of those case would give us our x-intercept. So I'm going to add 7 to this one. I'm going to subtract 1 to both sides from this one, and I have found my two x-intercepts. Third one, I'm going to look for a greatest common factor. For the one on the left, there isn't anything more interesting than 1 anyways. Second thing I look for, is it a difference of squares, which would be 2 terms? Nope. Then it would be a trinomial, either a simple or a more complicated one. This is not a simple trinomial because it has the 2 in the front. So I have to do decomposition. All right. If I'm going to do decomposition on this thing, I am going to write it such that I break that middle term into 2 parts. Then add to 5 and multiply to those two together, -6. So multiplying to -6 could be 1 and 6 or 2 and 3. One has to be positive and one has to be negative. So if I've got a mix of signs, this is the pair that's going to work. I want to have the 6 positive and the 1 negative. So my next line would be 2x squared. Order doesn't matter with these two, but I'm going to put the 6x first. Subtract 1x, subtract 3 equals 0. Now I factor by grouping. I'm going to do those two first. 2x squared plus 6x. Greatest common factor for those two would be 2x. In my brackets, I need an x for the first term plus 3 for the second. Then I factor the last two. And I'm cheating a little. I know I want x plus 3 in my brackets. So I look at those two terms, and the only common factor they have is the number 1. So I'm going to write it, but I'm going to choose -1 as my common factor so that my first term is x, and my second term will be positive 3, so that -1 times positive 3 is the -3 that I was looking for. And look at that. The brackets are the same, so that my final answer will be the common bracket and the leftovers. I have fully factored this thing, which means my x-intercepts are hiding in there somewhere. Well, one of the two brackets could be 0. That tells us where our x-intercepts are. That tells us where y is equal to 0. So if x plus 3 is equal to 0, x equals -3. That's one of the zeros. Or if 2x minus 1 equals 0, I'm going to add 1 to both sides. I'm going to divide both sides by 2. And there is my second x-intercept. If I put either one of these two values into the equation, I get y equals 0. So I have the 2 points, -3, 0, and a half 0, which are x-intercepts. Last one. I have a difference of squares. I don't have a greatest common factor, but I do know with difference of squares that I factor it with 2 sets of brackets, identical terms at the first, so I need 2x, 2x. I know one has a positive sign and one a negative, and identical terms at the back, other than the sign, 3 and 3. I have factored that thing as a difference of squares, and hiding in there are my 2 x-intercepts. So if the first one is, now if you recognize what it is, you can just write it down. You don't have to show this step, but if 2x plus 3 were 0, then my x-intercept would be, I'm subtracting 3 from both sides, then I divide by 2. So one of my x-intercepts is -3/2, or -1.5. The other x-intercept, I'm going to add 3 to both sides. Then I'm going to divide both sides by 2, which would be +1.5. Now we just need to practice.